Hey there, and welcome to an episode of Divorce Happy Hour. My name is John Nachlinger. I am the co host of Divorce Happy Hour as well as the co owner of New Jersey Divorce Solutions, a divorce and family law firm located in central New Jersey. So, today I want to talk to you about the marital home. Most of the time, the biggest asset that people have when they're getting divorced is their house. Usually, the only thing that would be bigger than the house might be your retirement plan. But the house is such an important part of a divorce. So, first, I want to talk to you a little bit about how we divide the house. And then I also want to talk to you about what happens after your divorce. Because, um, like with all things, you can agree to something. There can be something in writing that you've signed, a court order, but people still have to comply with that order after it's been executed. So let's talk first about how do we deal with the house. So when you're living in a house with your spouse, there's really three options that you have to get rid of the house. One is that you buy out the other spouse, meaning you pay the other spouse money for their share of the equity in the house. The equity being the appraised value of the house minus all the mortgages and other loans that you have. And you pay it to them and you refinance the mortgage into your name. That is a very common way to dispose of the house. The other way to dispose of the house is obviously to sell it. Now, I will tell you that a lot of times people get into an argument about each person wanting to buy out the other person's interest in the house. Well, if that's the case, all things being equal, the house really should just be sold. I will tell you that if you have minor children who are in school and the custodial parent wants to stay in the house, that can sometimes be the tiebreaker in terms of who gets to stay in the house. So a buyout of the equity, number one. Number two, selling the property. Or number three is really much more of a broad category where one person can stay in the house for some period of time without the house either being sold or the equity being bought out. And again, that sometimes happens when you've got a child who's maybe a junior in high school, senior in high school, and we just want to get them graduated before we do something with the house. So once you decide what you're going to do with the house, it's very important that you put in your agreement language that protects you. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is you want to know, number one, how are we calculating the value? Usually that means getting an appraisal from somebody that you and your spouse or your attorneys agree is going to appraise the property and provide a value. Once you have the value, if you're going to sell the property, you need to know what you're going to list it for. That's why an appraisal is sometimes useful if you can't agree otherwise. But if you're going to buy out the interest of your ex-spouse, then you also need to know what the value is of the house. So you can calculate what the equity is in the house and what the buyout is going to be. So you need to protect yourself in that way. But there's going to be a period of time, let's say you're selling the house, between the time you execute this agreement and the time the house is sold. Although I will tell you today that that period might not be very long because houses are selling like hotcakes. But usually there's going to be a position, a period of time where you are going to both be co-owners of the house, but it hasn't been sold yet. So your agreement needs to deal with things like who's going to pay for maintenance on the house, who's going to make the mortgage payments, who's going to pay for the insurance, who's going to pay for repairs. If you're selling the house, there's probably going to be a home inspection done at some point, and the buyers might want some repairs done to the house. Who's paying for those? How are we going to agree on what we're going to agree to fix and what we're not going to agree to fix? Those are all things that really can occur, and therefore they can occur. You should address them in your agreement. My philosophy is always that anything that's foreseeable, we should always address in your settlement agreement. Because if it's foreseeable, why not address it today? And if it doesn't happen, great, it doesn't happen, but at least you've addressed it. So what's important is once you figure out how you're going to dispose of the property, that your agreement provides protective language so that you aren't fighting with your spouse after the divorce is over. Some other things that are very useful to have in your agreement is that both of you agree that if you get an offer within a certain percent of your listing price, that you're going to accept it. And that's another way to avoid conflict. Usually I'll put in 2, 3, 4, 5%. So if you get an offer within that percentage and the two of you cannot agree otherwise, at least you know then it would be an acceptable offer. Also, whenever you're disposing of property in divorce, you need to know who's going to claim all the tax deductions for the house. So the interest on the mortgage, the property taxes, you need to figure those things out as part of your agreement because they're very valuable things that we need to figure out who's claiming what. Because you don't want a situation where you both try to claim things and all of a sudden the IRS is knocking at your door, right? So again, you can sell the house, which is what I just was talking about. You can do a buyout. The buyout is kind of a little bit more interesting because once you figure out what the equity is, it almost always means that someone needs to refinance a mortgage so that they can take the person who's not staying in the house and take their name off the mortgage, but also take out cash to pay for the other person's equity. So what's going to happen with that is you're going to have to come up with some period of time that makes sense. Whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. These days it's very unpredictable how long it's going to take to get a new mortgage. So sometimes you have to take that into account. And again, while that process is going on, what are you going to agree that's going to happen to the house? Let's say the hot water heater explodes. Do we agree that the second you get divorced, the person who's buying out the interest is 100% responsible for that house no matter what happens? Those are things you need to agree to when you're getting divorced because you don't want to be dealing with these things afterwards. And the most complicated way to obviously resolve the division of the house is through keeping it in both parties' names for some period of time. And that's more complicated for reasons that were probably obvious from what I just said a second ago, is a lot of things can happen with your house. Your air conditioning unit can stop working. Your pool pump can stop working. Who's paying for those things? So, those are all things that you really need to think about in a very methodical fashion to ensure that you've got a plan and that you understand who's doing what. So you have your agreement, you have an agreement about what you're going to do with your house. Either someone's going to buy out the other one's interest, you're going to sell the house, or you're just going to keep it in both names for some period of time. Now you've reached your agreement. Now you're divorced. Let's say you're selling the house. Now you've got a situation where somebody maybe doesn't want the house sold. And there's all kinds of things someone can do if they don't want the house sold. If they're living in the house, they can tell the realtor, no, you can't come show the house. You can't come at this time. You can't come at that time. I can't do an open house this weekend. You can delay things and make the process slow down. And that's something that people do all the time who want to delay things. Because if people can't see the house, it's unlikely you're going to get somebody to sell it. Or buy it, I should say. But if you look at it from the other side, if you do not address showing the house in your agreement, if you don't address the listing price, you are just setting yourself up for all kinds of trouble. So let's talk about listing price. That is such a subjective number, right? You talk to 5 realtors, you're probably going to get 5 different listing prices because they all have an opinion based on their knowledge of the market, what they think you should start the house at. So you've got listing price that can cause a delay in listing the house. Then the next issue that you always have to deal with is, should we reduce the price? If your house is on the market for 30 or 60 days, it may very well be that you haven't listed the price of the house appropriately. So do we need to have some reductions in price? That is something else you can agree to at the onset. That after a certain number of days, the parties agree that the house will be reduced in price by a certain amount. Because once you're divorced, you don't want to stay married to this person through owning property together. You want to be completely divorced. So you need to make sure you're doing things to move that along. And of course, when it comes to the actual final processes of selling the house in terms of, like I said, the homeowner's inspection and maybe repairs that need to be done, that's just ripe for dispute. Again, that's why you have to resolve things early on. Because what happens if you don't resolve those kinds of disputes in your agreement? You're going to find yourself back in court, months, maybe weeks, but months after you were just divorced, fighting about things that should have been resolved in your agreement. Now, I'll tell you right now, if you are in the process of getting divorced and you are negotiating what's going to happen with your marital home, and all it says is something like, wife will buy out husband's interest in the house for one half of the equity, period, that is not a good agreement. That is a bad agreement. That's a horrible agreement. You need to be protected. I just told you any number of things that could happen when you're going through this process that are foreseeable and that you should address in your agreement. This is why it is so important when you're going through a divorce that you actually are being represented by an attorney that specializes in divorce and family law matters. Somebody who actually does this all the time and so is able to see things that happen all the time, is able to foresee things that will happen or could happen that you need to be protected from. I mean, you need to know who's paying the bills on the house, who's paying for the utility bills, who's paying for, the sewer bill, who's paying for the property taxes. Because we all know that when you're married, usually utility bills are in one person's name. So, if that one person's not the one staying in the house, you've got a problem. So there's all kinds of things that you need to think about whenever you're selling property or you're buying out property or you're keeping property for some period of time. You need to make sure that you are methodical and thoughtful in the way that you protect yourself. And obviously that starts with having an attorney who knows what they're doing and is going to be able to protect you and be able to provide that guidance from their experience about what happens when people have to dispose of their marital home after divorce. I'm telling you right now, it is the one thing that is so avoidable to have disputes about. I think that most disputes when it comes to your house are just easy to deal with. They really are. Now, obviously, you can agree to anything in your agreement, and the other person can just, say, screw you, I'm not going to do it. That's a whole different issue. I'm not talking about that. That can happen with any court order. That can happen with any part of your agreement. And that's when sometimes you do have to go back to court and get a judge to order them to just comply with the agreement. But if you are methodical and you actually address all of the issues that are foreseeable whenever you're disposing of a marital home, it really can go a long way towards making your life so much easier whenever you're getting divorced. All right? That's my message for today. I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you next time.